This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Claire Kimball.
And I'm Andrew Williams.
Andrew, great to have you on this week. I'm very glad that you're here because we've got a couple of specialty topics that I think you'll be very handy for. We're starting with this week's big climate announcement, also some Pacific security deals that just aren't getting done.
No, they're not. They're not the subjects on which I'll be handy, by the way. I just don't want to set expectations too high. We'll also look at ANZ's great big fine and, this I might be a little handier on, Robert Redford's death.
Yep, and we're top 10 baby on the podcast ranker, that is. Let's get into it. Andrew, where were you on Friday, the 15th of September in the year 2000?
I was in either year 9 or 10. I can't quite remember. And probably making a play or auditioning for a play or doing some kind of drama activity at high school in Perth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was much older than that.
Not much
I'm
older.
still much older than that. Yeah, but it's a big change, isn't it? Like year 9, year 10 versus like
Adulthood.
3 years in the workforce kind of thing, which is where I was. Of course, we're talking about this nod to the start of the Sydney Olympics, which was in the news this week. Where I was on that day, I was on the road to Sydney from Canberra for day one of competition, which was starting on the Saturday. I had tickets to the equestrian event.
Brilliant.
The one with the dressage and the cross country and the show jumping.
Yes.
My parents flew up from Albury and the three of us went along to that. We had such a great time. I went to so many other events. So swimming, rowing, athletics. I was there the night that Kathy Freeman won for the 400 metres.
That's just, that's a life highlight.
Exactly.
Has to be, surely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of those moments. It's really hard to describe, I think, how amazing Sydney was during that fortnight.
Even from a long way away I was about as far away as you can be from doing sport in Sydney. I was doing drama in Perth. But we're talking about this because it's the 25th anniversary, of course. And even I felt that sense of community that was going on, that was emanating out of Sydney at the time, even, being in high school and watching it from afar. But I remember Kathy Freeman's race so clearly. I remember Ian Thorpe's race so clearly. And it was nice to see both Ian Thorpe and Kathy Freeman reminisce this week. And even Nikki Webster, whose performance I remember very clearly, even she participated in the celebrations.
Yeah, she did. The full opening ceremony to the Olympics is on YouTube, all 4 hours of it. I'll put that link in the episode notes. And look, it's an early recommendation from me today. I reckon pop it on as you're doing your housework this weekend.
And then follow that up with a closing ceremony as well, because the closing ceremony's got sort of banger after banger. It was really fun, and they got a lot of really sort of fun musical performances in it. So just do them back to back. And it might be a bit of extra motivation for the Brisbane crew because, of course, it's not actually that long until Queensland hosts the 2032 Games.
When I think of, again, how brilliant Sydney was, being in Sydney was, and the build-up was, there were all sorts of questions, can we do it? And it was inconvenient and roads closing and all of that kind of stuff. But to get to it and then have that lovely sort of aftermath of these wonderful things that you've got new infrastructure and actually did some really exciting things, it's pretty cool. So Brisbane's got that all ahead of it, of course. It's not that long to go.
Not that long to go now.
All. On to the biggest news story of the week, and Monday saw a significant moment for policy when it comes to climate.
Yep.
It was the release of something that's called the National Climate Risk Assessment. This is the first time that the government has done a really comprehensive analysis of what climate change could mean for Australia in practical terms.
Yeah, so this isn't about emissions targets or renewable energy or carbon taxes. It's a model of what happens to Australia if global temperatures keep rising. And so they've essentially mapped that out to 2050 and beyond.
Yeah, the federal government commissioned that. They've got all of the big scientific agencies involved, the Bureau of Meteorology, the CSIRO, the Bureau of Stats, Geoscience Australia. They've all had input. And Chris Bowen, who is the Climate Change and Energy Minister, he released it with Treasurer Jim Chalmers, as we said, on Monday. Even in the best case scenario, limiting warming, global warming, to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we're looking at a $40 billion every year bill when it comes to covering disaster costs. That's by 2050.
Yeah, and just to make that real for you, so what the report says is that Darwin currently floods about 9 days a year from coastal surges, but under a 3-degree warming scenario, that becomes 72 days, so times it by 8. Townsville could see 150 days of coastal flooding annually. Heat-related deaths in Sydney could surge by over 400%.
Yeah, pretty drastic numbers. So this report basically sets the scene for what the Albanese government was then to announce later in the week when it comes to Australia's 2035 emissions reduction target. This is, of course, our commitment to the world when it comes to how much we're going to cut greenhouse gas emissions over the next decade.
So the recommendation from the Climate Change Authority was 65 to 75% cuts by 2035. That's compared to what it was in 2005. In the end, the government actually landed on their own range of 62 to 70%. So for context, our current target for 2030 is 43%. And that was an increase on what the Morrison government target was, which was 26 to 28.
So it is a very significant emissions cut that's required. And that's why Chris Bowen has been peddling really hard in recent times to position this new target as ambitious and achievable. He says it's going to be really important to show Australians, and this is his quote, how we can create jobs and lower emissions at the same time. And internationally, there's been a fair bit of positioning to do on this as well.
Yeah, and this is really interesting because Australia wants to co-host COP31. That is the big UN climate summit, and we want to host it with Pacific nations in 2026. Probably based out of Adelaide as the main centre of it, and we need their support. So that was a talking point at last week's Pacific Islands Forum where they did formally back our bid for COP31. But there's some tension that's bubbling away underneath all of this because these island nations are particularly vulnerable to rising sea levels and extreme weather events. And then they see Australia approving the Northwest Shelf gas project extension to 2070, which must have raised an eyebrow or two.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that development last week, so let's cover that bit off. The Northwest Shelf is one of Australia's biggest gas operations. It's off Western Australia. It's operated by Woodside Energy in conjunction with Chevron and Shell, and it'll generate billions of dollars when it comes to export revenue and also supporting thousands of jobs. So what happened is last Friday, the federal government approved it to keep running until 2070. So for another 45 years. The government argues that gas is a transition fuel and it's needed while renewable energy scales up. This is the argument that essentially we've got to keep the lights on somehow, particularly as our coal-fired power plants, which do actually create quite a significant amount of carbon emissions as they're becoming decommissioned over the coming years.
Yeah, and the government's been prosecuting that line really consistently about the Northwest Shelf. They've been sort of very clear around gas being important.
As a WA guy, you know this all too well.
I know this all too well.
Yeah.
I've heard it many times, and that's a very neat explanation of what it is and why it's relevant to this discussion is that Environment Minister Murray Watt gave final approval last Friday. So that was then followed by the Pacific Island Forum Leaders Summit. And Pacific nations see this as hypocritical. They say that it shows Australia is prioritising our own economy over their survival.
Vanuatu's climate minister was one who didn't hold back.
No.
He said that extending the gas project could breach international climate law. And his exact words, it's not the act of a friend, which is a really good scene setter for what else is happening within our regional relationships. Alongside these very critical climate discussions, Australia's been trying to lock down security agreements across the Pacific.
And this is partly about countering the growing influence of China in that region. So Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was expecting to sign 2 big deals over the last couple of weeks. One with Vanuatu, there they are again.
Yeah.
That would have been worth about $500 million over a decade for things like climate resilience and security support. And there was also a defence treaty with Papua New Guinea that was planned as well this week. Neither of those got done.
Andrew, 12 months ago, just before you joined the Squiz, did you expect that you would know so much about some security agreements with Vanuatu and with Papua New Guinea?
I didn't, but I find it fascinating. This has been fascinating all week, and I've been particularly deep into it. So, it's a really, really interesting geopolitical discussion.
Vanuatu, that deal fell over because their Prime Minister has concerns about clauses that would limit the sort of support, infrastructure support, particularly that Vanuatu can get funding from. Essentially, it would restrict their ability to work with China. Yeah. China, of course, as we know, is putting up a lot of cash to support infrastructure projects in the region. For Papua New Guinea, despite planning this very big signing ceremony that was in conjunction with their 50th anniversary of independence, they ended up issuing a statement saying they just need a bit more time.
Yeah, and that was also after they had a sort of big fancy volcano-top signing ceremony to kind of what they called initial the agreement in the first place. So you would have thought at that point this is locked in, but not so much. They said they needed more time for domestic processes. And in terms of what that is actually about, just going to kind of give you the cliff notes of the analysis I've read. So essentially, you've got Australia trying to lead on climate for the Pacific, but we're still expanding fossil fuel projects, which is causing some difficulty. And then at the same time, asking those nations to limit their options with other partners like China.
I read one piece from the Lowy Institute, which of course does really great work when it comes to Australia's foreign relations. It said essentially all of the low-hanging fruit in improving relationships in the Pacific has been plucked. Things like increasing aid, doing things like sports diplomacy. Remember, we're bringing PNG into the NRL.
Yeah.
Also more labour mobility. So there are countries who will be able to send citizens to work in Australia without much rigmarole when it comes to all those immigration processes. So all of that has been done. Now we're into the hard stuff, and there's a lot more legwork that's needed before they commit to this sort of new tier of security agreements that Australia is really asking them to commit to. Before we finish up, the coalition had its own issues on climate this week.
Yeah, so Andrew Hastie, who is considered sort of a rising star of the Liberal Party and maybe a future leader of the party as well, he's also a fellow West Australian. So he threatened to quit the front bench if coalition leader Susan Lee recommits to support the net zero by 2050 target. So he did admit that he's in the minority on that, but Lee said this week that the Liberals aren't going to have net zero at any cost.
They're trying to balance business concerns about the cost of emissions reduction. That's a real conversation. Essentially, businesses, particularly if you're in manufacturing or anything that consumes a lot of electricity, they need affordable power to be competitive, including in international markets. So balancing that with pressure from climate-conscious voters who essentially have walked away from the coalition and gone to the Teals, for example. Their energy spokesman is Dan Tehan. He's another Lib who is touted as a potential future leader. He's reviewing the policy, so stay tuned for what they find. 3 other notable stories for the week, and we're starting with Israel launching its ground offensive into Gaza City. They sent tanks, remote-controlled armoured vehicles deep into the streets on Tuesday. This is the operation that they've been talking about for some weeks now. Israel's Defence Minister is Israel Katz. He posted that Gaza is burning as the IDF strikes went into what they call terror infrastructure.
I think we were both quite taken aback when we saw that quote come out of the Israeli government.
Yeah, when I saw it, I have to say I thought it was a quote from an aid agency or the United Nations or some concerned organisation. But it really does underscore Israel's determination to press on with this war.
And Gaza City really is the focus now. So this is an area where famine has already been confirmed. Population of about 1 million people have been displaced multiple times now over 2 years of war. And what's different about this offensive, it can be hard to get a handle on exactly what's going on from a military standpoint, but is both the tactics and the stated goals of what Israel is trying to achieve.
Yeah, so I guess essentially Israel is using very different forms of war, remote-controlled vehicles packed with explosives, essentially these massive rolling bombs. Critics say that they're prioritising avoiding Israeli casualties over any sort of precision with the attack.
So as you can imagine, that approach is causing significant amounts of concern. And Netanyahu also didn't mention freeing hostages as a war aim this time. Instead, he focused on defeating the enemy. So getting into what he believes is a Hamas stronghold is the priority.
I saw that some hostage families protested near Netanyahu's home this week, accusing him of essentially abandoning their loved ones.
Yeah.
As for the timing, this offensive launched on the same day as the United Nations Commission published its findings that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza.
So it found that Israel had committed 4 of the 5 genocidal acts under international law. They are killing Palestinians, causing them serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about their destruction, and imposing measures intended to prevent births. The 5th that wasn't included on that list is forcibly transferring children of the group to another group.
Israel immediately rejected that report as distorted and false, but it's a significant escalation when it comes to the international legal pressure on Israel. Another point about the timing is that in the hours before launching that attack on Gaza City, Netanyahu gave a speech preparing Israelis for international isolation.
And I guess this links back to the broader change of rhetoric that I guess is the theme to this. So he told them to become a super Sparta. So basically a militarized, economically self-sufficient society with fewer trade partners. The Tel Aviv stock market immediately dropped following that speech, and the head of Israel's biggest trade union said, "I don't want to be Sparta. Israeli society is exhausted and our status in the world is very bad."
And Netanyahu's critics say that he's prolonging the war to avoid elections, also to stay out of jail on corruption charges. He actually skipped a hearing on his corruption trial on Tuesday because of the attack on Gaza City that took precedence. The bottom line, this offensive marks a turning point. We can expect it to fuel what's coming up at the United Nations, including next week as world leaders head to the General Assembly.
Yes, and you can be sure that we'll be covering that on the Squiz today. We'll move on now to ANZ being slapped with a record $240 million fine for widespread misconduct this week. So the details here paint a picture of a bank that systematically, and that's an important word, failed its most vulnerable customers.
This isn't just about a regulatory breach, though. It's not just about what ASIC might have done and what ANZ might have done. There are some real people tied up in all of this. Some of that fine relates to customers being let down when they needed help the most. So ANZ admitted to ignoring 488 customers in financial hardship. So people dealing with unemployment or serious illness or a family violence incident, bereavement, for example. These are customers who reached out to ANZ for help, and there are examples of them being either ignored or pursued for debts.
There was another breach. That $240 million fine involved a whole stack of different things. They charged fees to thousands of deceased customers for years because they had no systems to stop it. So if you can imagine dealing with a loved one's death and then finding out that the bank has been charging their account after they died. So the biggest penalty of all of those was $80 million. And this is for a phrase that I've encountered a lot, Claire, which is unconscionable conduct. And it relates to how ANZ handled a massive government bond sale.
I'm hoping you've encountered unconscionable conduct, not in your personal behaviour.
No, certainly not. No, in my professional, because I did used to work for ASIC and we wrote a lot of media releases about unconscionable conduct.
I am relieved.
Yeah, not me.
Andrew, when it came to that bit about unconscionable conduct, you ducked explaining that this week on the Squiz today because it is complex.
Yeah, it's extremely. I have about 45 seconds on the Squiz today to talk about each story, and you're about to find out why I ducked it on that. But we have a chance now.
Now is your chance.
So we have a chance. So the federal government was selling $14 billion worth of bonds to investors, and ANZ was helping them to manage that sale. And a bond is basically like an IOU. So if a government needs to borrow money, it sells an IOU to an investor. The investor gives the government cash now, and the government promises to pay them back with interest later. So it's basically how governments fund things like infrastructure without immediately raising taxes on people. And what happened here is ANZ's traders engaged in aggressive selling of bond futures in the hour before pricing.
Great job explaining bonds. How about bond futures?
Okay, so think of it like this. Imagine you're selling your car and you've hired someone to help you get the best price, but right before buyers start bidding, your helper on that sale starts loudly telling everyone that car prices are about to crash. So ANZ had taken large positions, think of those as kind of like bets, basically, that bond prices would fall. So their actions to then push the price of bonds down potentially cost taxpayers $26 million because the government got less for their bonds than they would have if ANZ hadn't started trying to push the price down.
Well done.
I hope that made sense.
I am with you.
I spent 3 years trying to understand this stuff.
I am with you. I might go back as I'm listening to this and listen to it again just to make sure I've really got it. But essentially, like, again, to this point, these actions have real-world consequences. Yeah. If taxpayers have been dudded more than $20 million, there has to be some sort of consequences. So Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was asked about that this week. He called what ANZ did a shocker. ASIC chair Joe Longo said that it was probably the most serious thing a bank has done in Australia in years. He also fessed up on ABC TV's 7:30 to being an ANZ customer.
Yeah, that was a great interview by Sarah Ferguson. The value of not keeping a conversation going and just leaving a pause. If you get a chance to watch it, highly recommended. And that comment that Joe Longo made was interesting because this is just 6 years after the Banking Royal Commission, which uncovered a whole stack of stuff that had happened in the banking and finance sectors that was untoward, to say the least. So that was an interesting comment that he made. Also, just in terms of ANZ, that bank has a new CEO. His name is Nuno Matos. He previously worked at HSBC. He was Chief Executive of Wealth and Personal Banking. He's originally from Portugal. He's worked in banking across Europe, Asia, Latin America during his career. He has come in, been there a few months. He's already announced the cutting of 3,500 jobs. If you add contractors, possibly up to 4,500.
He's promised a complete cultural reset. He says it'll take 2 or 3 years to actually transform ANZ. As you know, we work with Joe Aston and Rampart. He's the sharpest business and finance commentator in town. This week, Joe described Matos as wielding the flamethrower like a man in his element when it came to the job cuts.
Yeah, it's quite an image. And Joe also pointed out that ANZ employs 20% more people than Westpac, but they generate less revenue, which is really interesting stat to read. Despite all of this turmoil, there's no sign that investors are walking away from Matos. In fact, it seems like they're backing him because ANZ's share price has barely moved through all of this.
Yeah, that fine announcement was significant, the biggest, as you said, in corporate history, and their share price was down less than 1%. Investors are essentially betting that Nuno Matos is going to close the performance gap with other banks, that he is going to transform that business. But a very tough time for staff wondering about their jobs. I'm sure there's more than a few customers also wondering about what it means for service as well. Let's move on to the death this week of Robert Redford.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate how big a name Redford was in Hollywood and how significant a figure. He's very famous as an actor. You probably know him as an actor, but he has quite the filmography as a director as well, which it's worth talking about. But we'll start with the basics. So he was born in California in 1936. He was a working actor for years, but it was with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which he's starting with Paul Newman, that really led to his breakout. And that was in his early 30s. He would have been 33. That feels ancient compared to how young people are now when they break out. It feels like they're in their teens or early 20s when actors become famous now.
Yeah, and goes to his tenacity, doesn't it, that he actually went through that whole cycle of TV shows and then minor movie roles before he really broke through for years and years and years. He was a very good-looking man.
Yes, and look, that's just not us talking about that.
I'm sure if there was a science into this, science would say that he's a very good-looking man, or a good-looking rooster, as my grandmother would have said. There's something almost in every obituary that we've read that's highlighted that about him. Also that Redford himself was quite uncomfortable about that. Yeah,
he was. He didn't want to make it his whole thing, but he was also able to use it to his advantage to play characters that seemed like kind of really wholesome or sort of all-American, I guess, on the surface, but maybe had slightly tragic or darker undertones. So think Jay Gatsby in The Great Gatsby, for example, someone who seems very glamorous lifestyle on the surface, but has something darker lurking underneath.
Despicable man, Jay Gatsby. Yeah, that's right. You might be familiar with some of his really famous movie roles, like Butch and Sundance. All the President's Men, favourite of mine.
Great
The
movie.
Sting, The Way We Were. It's a bit too romantic and soppy for me, that one. But as our resident movie buff, Andrew, have you got any of these sort of, I guess, deeper cuts that people might want to go and check out when it comes to Robert Redford?
I absolutely do. First of all, The Sting, fabulous movie. Definitely watch that if you haven't already. But I'll pick 3 for you. The Candidate, that's sort of a political satire. He did replay sort of a very vacuous political candidate again.
Very pretty one.
Very pretty one. Again, using his looks to his advantage. That's a great movie. The Natural, that's a terrific baseball drama that he was in if you like a good sports movie, and I do. But if you're looking for something a bit more modern and a bit more off the beaten track, there's a 2013 film called All Is Lost, where he plays a sailor who is trying to survive an accident at sea. He's the only person in the movie. It's entirely about him. There's relatively little dialogue. He's incredible in it.
You tell me that it's one to watch and I will go and watch it.
Don't blame me. It's the worst 103 minutes you've ever spent. I really liked it. I liked it.
No, I'm very interested now.
Yeah.
Look, that's a really quick skate through
Yes.
Redford as an actor, but he was a very accomplished director as well. He won an Oscar for directing. He never achieved that as an actor,
No.
and he actually won that Oscar for the very first thing that he ever directed, and that was 1980's Ordinary People, which is about a wealthy family that essentially falls apart.
Yeah, it came out of the gate very strong, picking up a Best Director and Best Picture Oscar for Ordinary People in 1980. He made a lot of successful films, A River Runs Through It, The Horse Whisperer, but he also made one of my favourite films of all time, and this is why I'm particularly excited to talk about Robert Redford today, which was A Quiz Show from 1994, which, if you haven't seen it, is about a 1950s game show cheating scandal.
Now, Andrew, when I said that we had you on today for a couple of specialty topics, like we really mean
Yeah, quite
specialty
literally.
topics.
Yeah.
So tell us about your connection to the quiz show.
So if you are having a very slow weekend and you want to go back and watch season 3 of Mastermind Australia on SBS On Demand.
And I do.
You will see, I think in episode 84, which is the semi-final, that I am on that episode and my specialist subject is Quiz Show, the Robert Redford film. So in the lead up to that, I watched that movie 20 to 30 times to practice it and make sure that I knew every frame of it really, really well. And then when I was on the show, I don't want to give away spoilers, but it was worth it. It was worth it is all I'll say.
Wink. Winky face.
It was worth it. I'm also on episode 85. Just want to, you know.
It's oh, there you go. To wrap this up, we should also point out that Robert Redford founded the Sundance Institute, which supports the biggest independent film festival in the United States. It's on again in February next year, so you'd have to expect that they're going to make a very, very special edition of that festival to honour his legacy.
Yeah, it'll be one to watch for sure.
On to what's happening with the week ahead, and as this time of year dictates, it kicks off with some sport.
September, baby. The NRLW finals are here. It's the first week. Newcastle Knights versus Gold Coast Titans and North Queensland Cowboys versus the Cronulla Sharks. Both games are on Saturday. Now, this is a 6-team finals series, so it takes place over 3 weeks. Essentially, these 4 teams playing this week are fighting off for the opportunity to play the 2 league heavyweights, Brisbane and Sydney, next week. Whoever it is, they're going to be a little bit lamb to the slaughter because Brisbane and Sydney are the heavy, heavy favourites to make the grand final this year.
Of course, the AFL and the NRL men's finals continue as we head towards those grand finals. The 190th Oktoberfest kicks off in Munich on Saturday, today, sort of in the coming hours anyway. It runs until the 5th of October. This year, they're expecting around 7 million visitors to that. They've installed a new high-tech lost and found system. It uses RFID tags because apparently last year what happened was they collected over 4,000 items, including 600 passports, 400 wallets, 2 wedding rings and a set of dentures.
What would worry you most if you lost it? The passport, the wallet, the wedding ring or the denture?
Definitely the dentures.
The set of dentures, yeah. That's fair enough. Yeah, that's a pretty tough thing to get back. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock our time, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. That's not an easy phrase to say. Melbourne boy Oscar Piastri is having an incredible season. He's leading the Drivers' Championship. He and his teammate Lando Norris are absolutely dominating things. So hopefully that continues in Azerbaijan. Early Monday morning, more serious note, Conservative activist Charlie Kirk will have his memorial service.
Yeah, so it's at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. That's a 63,000-seat venue. President Donald Trump will attend and speak at that. Doing the time conversion, that's about 3 a.m. Monday morning, Eastern Australian time. The consequences of Kirk's death continue to be felt this week by late-night TV host Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah, so he made some comments and the FCC threatened the broadcaster's licenses if action wasn't taken against him. So the particular quote that seems to have really got their attention was, "We hit some new lows over the weekend with the Mugger gang trying to characterise this kid who killed Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it."
So if I'm reading between the lines, essentially saying that Kirk was killed by someone from Trump's own side for political gain.
Yeah, that seems to be the read of it, or certainly that's how it's being interpreted by the FCC and why they've taken action over it.
Yeah, so that's what that is all about. Moving on Monday, it marks the start of UN Leaders Week at the General Assembly in New York.
Yep, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will be spruiking Australia's world-first social media ban for under 16s. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays. The ban takes effect in December here, and then general debate starts on Tuesday. It runs all the way until next weekend. That's something I didn't realise exactly how long it goes for. And so general debate is where each country addresses the assembly. So Brazil's President Lula da Silva is up first, and then he'll be followed by Trump, who'll be speaking on behalf of the US.
Main topics to be discussed there as they get through that week: Palestinian recognition as its own state. Of course, Australia supports that now. We've talked about that on the weekly wrap in recent weeks. Albanese is hoping to meet President Trump as well at some point during the week. It seems like that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Their first ever in-person meeting as leaders of their nations. So let's see how that goes. Reverend Bill Cruz is going to be attending. He's going to be talking about children in crisis. His foundation is, of course, one of Sydney's largest charities providing direct services.
So that's the UN General Assembly. Just quickly backtracking to Monday evening, Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year that marks the beginning of their calendar year, features lots of symbolic foods like apples dipped in honey for a sweet new year. Rosh Hashanah, I learned this while reading about it, quite literally translates to head of the year or first of the year, and it's a significant period of reflection for Jewish people.
Also Monday night, the Brownlow Medal for the AFL's Fairest and Best. Andrew, you and I came to clash just before this, as I'm adamant that it's Fairest and Best. They really do like to point out that fair element of the game.
Yes, they don't ever
necessarily
follow
translate that way.
But yes, the favourites this year are Collingwood's Nick Dacos, Geelong's Bailey Smith in his first season with Geelong, and Adelaide captain Jordan Dawson, although the Brownlow might be small comfort for him given Adelaide went out of the finals in straight sets despite finishing first. But it's going to be very hard pressed to beat Nick Dacos this year, I suspect.
Yeah, one of those tricky things, isn't it? Minor premiers and not getting through to that pointy end of the finals.
Yep.
Tuesday, Kamala Harris's book 107 Days comes out. It's about her presidential campaign. She wrote it with an author named Geraldine Brooks. It's her account of just having 107 days when Biden stepped aside in that election. Also Tuesday, Andrew, so exciting, Fat Bear Week.
It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's an event so close to our hearts that we even did a shortcut on it. So for those who don't know, as I didn't before I turned up at the Squiz, but I very quickly learned about it. It's this online competition where you vote for the fattest brown bear in Alaska's Katmai National Park. Now, this isn't a shaming exercise.
No.
There's a very important reason that they are fattening up. They're all bulking up for winter hibernation and they're eating a lot of salmon.
It's very, very glorious in celebration of
Exactly.
their heft.
Yeah.
It's competitive eating, but for bears.
Yeah,
the
solid.
competition runs for more than a week. I know that essentially the whole of Squiz Today is going to be about this next week. Last year they had over 1 million votes come in from 100 countries. The reigning champ is Grazer. I've got a little trophy. Remember Kate a couple of years ago gave me a framed picture of Grazer thanking me for my support over the year. Grazer, of course, is history making, the first bear last year to win while raising a cub.
Yeah, multitasking. By the way, the bears have no idea that any of this is going on. They're just eating salmon, living
There's
their
a
lives.
camera on them full time.
Yeah.
You can dial in. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, well worth your time, I promise. On Wednesday, Slow Horses Season 5 drops. drops if you're a spy thriller fan out there. Gary Oldman is back as Jackson Lamb, one of the finest characters on television. Claire, this is one of your and my favourite shows.
Love it. Yeah, it's such a great show. Thursday, Australia Post is resuming all of that US shipping. Remember, they'd suspended some services in late August. That was due to the new US custom rules and also tariff requirements for these low value inbound parcels. So that's back on. Friday, we get the ABS death report for 2024.
And last year's report showed some concerning trends around preventable deaths, particularly in regional areas. So it'd be interesting to see how that's changed or not changed over the coming year. Hopefully it's changed for the better. On a musical note, nominees for this year's ARIA Awards will be announced on Thursday. On Friday, it's a public holiday in Victoria. You lucky ducks ahead of the AFL Grand Final on Saturday.
Not jealous about that at all. It seemed to come around very quickly, the Grand Final, for some reason. Now, Andrew, as, again, specialty topics, who do you think is going to be in the Grand Final?
So the favourites are Collingwood and Geelong, but that would be boring for me just to pick the favourites, right? So I'm going to go for, I reckon if there is an upset, it's going to be Hawthorn. Brisbane have had a lot of injuries. I think they'll struggle to beat Collingwood because they're just a bit of the walking wounded at the moment. Hawthorn and Geelong have a long storied rivalry in Australian rules. And I think if any team is going to ride the emotion and overcome a favourite, it's going to be Hawthorn. So I will predict Collingwood and Hawthorn Grand Final.
Okay. I have two people in my life who are very, very dear to me who are Hawthorn devotees. So fingers crossed for them.
Yep. Kiss of death from me. Sorry about that.
Squiz Recommends, I've already given you mine. 4 hours worth of the opening ceremony at the Sydney Olympics. How could you go wrong?
While you're on that, just watch Ian Thorpe's race, watch Kathy Freeman's race. Just have it, make a day of it.
It's weird. Like as already indicated, I'm not a particularly romantic or sentimental person. I get quite teary about those. Like it's just so amazing what they did.
Yeah, I've cried at sport before. It's fine.
Yeah.
And my recommendation is a new show on HBO Max. It's called Task. It's got a terrible title, just one of the worst of all time. I don't know why. It's like calling it Errand. But I would say that
Job.
it is. Yeah, exactly. It's like, call it something more exciting than that, as they did when the previous creative team behind this made Mayor of Easttown, which was a fabulous show made by HBO starring Kate Winslet. This time they've got Mark Ruffalo in the lead role. It's sort of like Heat in that you've got two very troubled men, one on either side of the law, who are sort of slowly on a collision course with each other. Very well made. Bleak as all get out. Not a laugh in there. Don't expect one, but I really enjoyed it.
Squiz Press, we're just going to go very quickly. We mentioned at the top, we're in the top 10 when it comes to the Australian podcast ranker. This is for our Squiz Today show. Mm-hmm. We've been in the top 10 now consistently for the last 3 months. It is the first time that that's happened to us. Essentially, it's just to say to you, thank you so much for listening to the Squiz Today podcast. Andrew, thank you to you and Alice for making such a great podcast. I did that slog for a long time.
Yes.
As people listening will and truly know, I don't do it every day anymore. I rarely do the Squiz Today podcast, but you guys are killing it.
Oh, thank you very much. And to reiterate what you said, we don't take a second of it for granted. Like the listenership, like we're not taking the position for granted. So we just really appreciate everyone who jumps on board, constantly amazed by the Squiz audience. We asked you to follow us on YouTube. You went and did. We asked you to complete a survey. You did it. You've given us great reviews on Apple Podcasts. It's all fabulous. So, thank you to you most of all.
And if you're an advertiser and want to get in front of a really smart, clever, impressive, influential bunch of people, come and have a chat to us because it's a big podcast that's doing really well. So thank you all round. That's it for us this week. Thanks, Andrew, for stepping in.
No worries at all. Happy to be here.
Catch you next week.